Hello class, welcome to week 12 of Programming Logic with Python. So this is the second video that I've created this week. This will be the lab walkthrough video. I do recommend before starting this homework assignment, this series of homework assignments, that you guys first read through the textbook. It's not that long. It'll take you maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, depending on how fast you read. Go through, then watch the other YouTube video I created. It is the topic overview, so it covers week 11 and week 12. Because I split chapter 7 between the 2 weeks, I figured it would be best just to create one YouTube video that covers everything at once, so that when you guys do study for test 3, it's much easier to just say, okay, I'm just going to watch the week 12 video because it covers chapter 7 in its entirety. It's not like two separate videos that cover half of chapter 7, half of the other half of chapter 7, which just ends up becoming more work for you guys to sort through videos. So that's why I figured one video. So that's why you guys didn't see the other video last week. I was debating on it, and then when I had created it, I was like, this is, first off, it's too short, and also it's hard to understand the full concept of it when you're only getting half the story. So that's kind of why I wanted to do the one whole video, so that's why I did wait for that. Okay, so this is the lab walkthrough video. So once you guys go through the YouTube video, the textbook, um, also go through the PowerPoint, which will also be coming up by sometime on Sunday as well. So do go through those three things and then come here for the homework assignment. Because this homework assignment does use a lot of concepts that I went over and the book goes through there. So I'm not going to really explain I am going to kind of explain what I'm doing, but the specific syntax I had explained in the previous video. So if you want to understand why I'm writing certain code, do watch those videos. This video is just kind of telling you the logic on how to approach these problems. So for the first question, lab activity 7.4, so they just want us to create class attributes. At least that's the title of this lab, so I'm assuming that's what they want us to do. So you guys can read all of this. It's a lot. I just ended up creating a 1 hour and 10-minute video, so my voice is a little bit tired. So I'm just gonna go straight to the steps for completion and just kind of see what they want me to actually do. So here that we have the main.py file. So they say go to the main.py file. So step 2, in the space provided, declare the package class by adding an items limit class attribute. Okay, so it might think, so the first thing you want to do is, we're learning about classes. So when they say declare the package class, they just mean create a class called package. So to do that, use the keyword class space, and then you would do whatever you want to name the class. In this case, they want us to name it package. And because this is my parent class, because I haven't created any other classes before this, I don't have to include the whole parenthesis things, as you'll see in my video. If this was a child class, I would, and then I would put whatever the name of the parent class is. Say my parent class is UPS, but I'm just explaining stuff that isn't relevant to this question. So I'm just going to create my class called package, end it with a colon, press enter. It's going to indent for you because now we're inside of the body of the parent of the package class. So inside of it, they want us to add by adding an items limit class attribute. They want us to add an attribute. It looks like it's just one. And this is a class attribute. And the reason I know is because of this. It says class by adding an items limit. So items limit is the actual name of this attribute, but it's a class attribute. So it doesn't exist inside of a specific method. So I could just write it right here. And if you guys want to know what a class attribute is, you guys, like I said, refer to the other YouTube video for the topic overview under week 12. So I'm just going to write items limit and equal. Did they want me to add a value to this? Doesn't look like it. Maybe on step 3. So add the initializer, which will check whether the item limit will be exceeded, and print a message indicating how many items must be removed. Finally, if the item limit has not been exceeded, print out the number of items in the package. Okay. Finally, create a while loop that requests the user to input the number of items and then asks if we'd like to continue. Create a few instances of the class package. Shows an example. So they don't really, oh, right here. Define a classical package that has a maximum capacity of 6 items. Okay, so the item limit is 6. See, I was looking for it because I was like, how could they not tell us to assign a value? You don't have to include semicolon. Prints out a message indicating that the limit has been exceeded and how many items must be removed from the package. Okay, so here, once we declare our class attribute, as I mentioned in the video, you always have to include your init method. So I'm just going to do that, even though they don't specifically tell me. They say add the initializer, which isn't quite clear. I mean, they could be referring to the constructor, or they could be referring to the init method. But I already know I always have to include the init method, so I'm just going to create it. So init underscore underscore, and then you do init 2 more underscores, so it's going to change color because it's a special method in Python. And then init, in the parentheses, you always have to include self as the first parameter. And then after it, you can add anything else you might want to add. So check whether the item limit will be exceeded and print the message. Let me see if they have anything else they want me to include here. Okay, so I'm just looking ahead and I see this right here. Do you guys see this? So it's items. So items could refer to a specific attribute. It could also refer to a specific method, but I'm gonna think it refers to a specific attribute because I don't. It'd be funny if they make us create multiple methods here. I'm assuming they just want us to create one method, so I'm just gonna put items here. I might not need it. I might need it. I don't really know. All right. So now we're inside of the body of the init method. So let's get to what they're asking for. So add the initializer, which will check whether the item limit will be exceeded, and print a message indicating how many items must be removed. So let's see. Add the initializer, which check whether. Okay, I think I understand what they want us. So they want us to just do like an if-else statement. If the items that are entered by the user exceeds 6, then print out let's see, the maximum item limit has been exceeded. Blank items must be removed from the package. And what they want is, okay, so how should I go about writing this? Let's start with the if. So items I actually do need, because I do need something to compare against items limit. So I'm going to do if items is greater than, oops, if items is greater than items limits, which is really just 6. So if whatever the value of items is greater than 6, and actually, what I should be doing is I should be doing self items limit. Maybe not. Maybe I could. nah. We'll just leave it as is. Okay, if this happens, if whatever the value of items is greater than items limit, which is 6, then print out what they want us to print out. So I believe it was down here. The maximum item limit has been exceeded. Period. Now notice that there's what looks like a variable that's holding the value 4 right here, because obviously we're not just going to write 4, because what if the value of items is 2 or 9? It's not going to say 4 items must be removed from the package. This 4 is actually being stored somewhere. So let's try to figure out where, how we can go about this. So I have this part of the print statement done. Actually, let me see. I print a message. Yeah, and print a message indicating how many items must be removed. So if you guys do read through the textbook, there is at the very bottom of one of the pages, I think it's within the first couple of pages in the textbook, at the very bottom they do reference the F, the F symbol that is used before a print statement. And the F symbol basically just allows us to include variables inside of our quotation marks or inside of our print statement so that we can get output that looks something like this. So to do that, all you have to do is preface your quotation marks with a F, and you're going to see it turns blue. And so what this is really just going to do is it's going to say everything inside of these quotation marks. I can include a string, but I can also include variables, but those variables have to exist inside of curly brackets. So what I'm going to do here is, if I want to get how many items must be removed from the package, so say the user puts 9, but the limit is 6, so I'm going to have to tell them, please remove 3 items from your package, so that you have at least, you're at the item limit of 6. So how would I do that? It's basic math. So I would just basically do items, which is a variable, because remember it's up here, minus items limit. So what I'm really just saying is, if you give me a value of 9 for items, do 9 minus 6, 3. So 3 is really the value that I'm getting at, is really what would be represented here. Obviously, if items was 10, it would be 4, and so forth. And then I'm going to continue my print statement. I believe I need to write from items to package. Items must be removed from the package. Oh, okay. Let's just move it down here, because then I'm kind of going off screen, which is fine. But so if you're gonna end up doing what I just did, make sure you indent this second part of the print statement so that it belongs to this print statement. Because if it's out here, remember, Python works off indentation. That's how Python knows certain lines of code belong to other lines of code. So if I want to say this line of code, this print statement, belongs to this initial print statement, I have to indent it. So just make sure you do that. Let's see, must be removed from the package. Period. Okay, perfect. So that's this is all one print statement, but it's spanning 2 different lines because I was running out of room here. So that's good. So remember, all of that was just the if statement. I need to include my else statement as well. So let's outdent so that we're no longer inside of the if statement. Let's do else. This is basic else statement syntax, else colon, enter. And now they want us, I believe, so if the item limit has not been exceeded, print out the number of items in the package. Okay, so they just want to print out the number of items that currently exist inside the package. I'm going to do print. And I believe if I go down here, so how many items are in the package? for there are, okay, so they want us to write here this. And the reason I'm referring to this terminal is because Cengage is very picky as far as the stuff that you include in your code. Even if you just wrote, I guess, items in here, while that would be right, they want you to actually output what's inside of here. So it's always good to refer to the output terminal that they give you. So because they say run the script by running the Python 3 main.py command, the output should look similar. So that's the key word. So they want it to look exactly, they say should, but what they're really saying is they want it to look exactly like this. Okay, so print, so that's why I'm always referring to it. There are, okay, remember, so here again, this 4 is actually representing a variable that's holding a value. In this case, it was 4. So same thing. So there are, so I'm going to do is, I'm going to end my first part of my print statement like this, and I'm going to write it the same way I wrote it up here. Now I'm going to do my quotation marks, and now the first thing I'm going to write here is a variable, and the variable is going to represent that 4 inside of my print statement. So what would 4 represent? Items, not item limit, because item limit is 6, so it's going to represent whatever the user enters in. So as long as that number is less than 6, items is going to represent it. So I'm just going to write items inside of it, and now I'm going to continue the rest of my print statement. So the rest of my print statement is items in the package being shipped out. Alright, and now I'm going to close my print statement with a end quotation mark. Great. So the last thing I want to do, I believe, or actually not the last, that was only step 4. Okay, so finally create a while loop that requests the user. So I don't know why they say create a while loop that request. They already did it for us. Request the user to input the number of items and then ask if we'd like to continue. So you might be thinking, okay, this if statement really depends on whatever the value of items is. But items needs to be assigned a value, and where are we assigning the value? Right here. So create a few instances of the class declaration to test your implementation. So let's try running this, and it might work, it might not, I might be missing something. How many items are in the package? Let's say 3. Perfect. Okay, so that's what I thought. Because they created an object for the class of package right here, and they just called it package, but with a lowercase p. So package is taking the place of self in my init method, and then items here is taking the place of items right here, which is a little bit confusing. So when I go to my if statement right here, if items is greater than items limit. So here, the way you would fix this code so that it could work is you would do self items actually. And then here, you would do self period items equals items. It's, you might think, hey, why do I have to do that? It's just, the self part is necessary because when we do create this new object, we're basically saying, okay, well, package period items equals items, and items being whatever the user enters in right here, so whatever this value is, because remember, we're taking it, the reason it's like this is because we're taking in user input. So typically we wouldn't have to write it in such a weird way, but because we're taking in user input and we're passing a argument of what looks like a variable that's holding in user input of items, that's where the confusion's coming from. So that's why we have to write it this way. So if I do it now, it's actually going to take it in. There are 3, okay, well, space here, space here. Okay, so I'm going to run it one more time. It should look a lot nicer now. Yeah, I put spaces. There are 3 items in the package being shipped out. If I do yes, and I need to do 9. Okay, I got an error. Oh, I have to change this. Self period items. Alright, so now if I do Python 3 main.py and I do 9. Okay, the maximum item limit has been exceeded. 3 items must be removed. Okay, so I'm just fixing my spacing right now. So Python 3 main.py. So basically everything, before I started adding the self, because the self is really just so that when I pass my argument of my new object of package through this int method, it's replacing all these selves with package. That's really all it's doing. Yes, we would include self for any attributes that we would include inside of our int method, but in this case, the confusion is coming from this piece of code right here. We declared a parameter of items, and then they're passing an argument of items into the parameter of items, which is why we have to specify which item parameter we're speaking of. Are we talking about the parameter version of it up here, or are we talking about the actual argument that's being passed through? So that's kind of why we're doing that. But yeah, this should work. So if I do 9, yeah, I'll do n. So if I go through the checks, it's funny, I laugh because this is the first of the lab activities, and you would think it's the easier one, but it is easy, but they try to complicate and try to trip you up in a lot of different areas. And with this whole print statement as your attribute, it just makes it, or this whole if-else statement with print statements, they're just trying to complicate things more than it should be. But that's that. Let's go to 7.5. So 7.5 is creating class methods. So class methods are just kind of like functions that exist inside of a class, and using information hiding. So information hiding, they're just referring to encapsulation, which is making a certain attribute like private or protected. But like I said, go to the other YouTube video for an actual explanation on that. I'm not going to really explain it here because I don't want this video to be too long. I'm already at 22 minutes. So let's go to the steps for completion. You guys can read all of this. I'm sure they have some great scenario for you, but I'm not reading it. So go to the main.py file. So define a movie player class. So I'm just going to straight up write that. We'll do class movie player, and add the firmware version class attribute, and assign it a value of 1.0. Okay, so this is a class attribute, so I'm just going to write it here. It doesn't pertain to a specific method. It doesn't even pertain to the init method. It pertains to the class itself. So it could be used anywhere in the class. That's the flexibility that a class attribute has over a instance attribute. But for more on that, the other YouTube video is helpful. So I'm just going to declare this. So firmware underscore version equals 1.0. Great. So define the initializer method, the init. So that's really, I was going to do it anyways. They didn't have to tell me it. And then pre-populate the movie list with a few movies. Make sure the movie store is private. Okay, so you're going to see me put the self parameter here, and that's just because you have to do it. So just get into the habit of including self as at least your first. It always is your first parameter. It's mandatory. Just get into the habit of doing it. So inside of it, whenever we call an attribute inside of our init method, like I was saying before, you do have to include self period before the name of whatever attribute you're going to do. But in the previous example, they just complicated it more than you had to. But here it's very simple. We're just declaring regular attributes and assigning them values. We're not doing an if-else. We're not including print statements inside of it. It's just regular attributes, which is great. I prefer these. So they want us to declare a movie list with a few movies. Make sure this movie store is private. So they want me to, let's do, so this is movie player, so let's do self period, and because it's private, so if I want to make an attribute private, I do 2 underscores before it, and then I do the name of whatever the attribute is. I'm just going to call this attribute movies, because I believe as a play method, yeah, they don't really specify whatever name I should give this attribute, so I'm just going to call it movies. You guys can call it whatever you want, or you can call it movies, up to you. And then the movies that they want me to include inside of it, I'm just going to write these because, like I said in the previous example, MindTap is SunGauge MindTap. It's very picky. So I'm going to save myself the headache, and I'm just going to write whatever they write as the desired output. So I'm going to do Finding Nemo, and capitalization is important too. So if they have an uppercase Finding Nemo, also do uppercase Finding Nemo, exactly how they write it. And that's not something that carries over to the real world. You can write it however you want to write it. If I want to do lowercase Toy Story, that's perfectly acceptable code. It's just they're trying to get you into good habits. They want you to develop good habits. If you're creating a attribute with like a list of something, and your elements in your list are movie titles. Movie titles usually have the title capitalized, at least the first letter. So they're just trying to get you into good habits. It's fine. It's just like, for me, it's a little bit annoying because I just kind of want to write it fast, but they're very picky. So yeah, let's go to, so that's that. Make sure the movie store is private, so I did make it private. And the way I know is because the 2 underscores before movies. So they want me to now define a play method. So a method is just another function. So I would just do def, and then I would do play, and I would always include self. You always include it in any method that you create inside of a class. And then inside of here, they want me to define which sets the current movie, or define the play method, which sets the current movie attribute to the first item in the movie list. Okay, so we always include self inside of every attribute. So I'm just going to do current movie. I'm just writing it the same way I see it here. This is a new attribute that belongs to the play method. And I'm going to assign it to the self period underscore movies attribute that I created up here. And I'm going to create it to the first movie in that list, the first item in my movies list. So the way I do it is just because it's a list, I can specify elements by index position. So if I just want the first element of that list, I can just do index 0, and that just really says print up display the first element in my list, which is frozen. Okay. So the next thing they want me to do is define the list movies method. So they want me to create another method. So I'm going to create another method / function. And I'm going to call it list movies. And of course I'm going to pass the default self parameter because you just do. It's a syntax that's always followed. And then inside of it, they want me to return the list of movies in the movie player. So they just want me to return the list of movies in movie player. So I'm just gonna do. I already know my list is this. So I'm just gonna do return self underscore movies. It's really, this is just gonna return all of this list right here. Very simple. They try to make it seem like it's more complicated than it is. It's not. When they say return something, you do return and then whatever they want you to return. Return the list. Great, the list is stored in this attribute or variable. So I'm just going to return that variable. It's very simple. So what step was I on? This one, 6. Okay, we'll add the update underscore firmware version method, which checks for whether the new version being provided is more recent than the current firmware version being updated, which I believe is what they've done here. We then add a few test lines to the main method and run the script. Okay, so as far as I can tell, I think we're good. So let's test it. Okay, so we do have a traceback error right here. Movie player object has no attribute update firmware. Movie player object, so player.list movies. Okay, player.current movie. Player.firmware version? Or player, yeah, this is fine. This is fine because it's referencing this method. This is referencing this attribute. This is referencing this class. The only thing that I find weird is this player period current movie. I have no attribute or method that's current movie, so maybe I should just create one. It doesn't hurt. So let's do self period current underscore movie, and I don't really have a value for this, so when you don't have a value, you just want Python to kind of just put a garbage value essentially for the attribute. This doesn't go for variables, it goes for attributes. If you want a attribute to be assigned a garbage value, what you could do is you could just write none. It's perfectly acceptable. So now when I run this, I'm not sure if it's going to work, but I did address this missing attribute call. Okay, it still didn't like it. Let's see. Class movie, firmware, def and self movies, play self movies, 0. Self return period slash movies. Oh, you know what? It might be this. Because yes, we covered all of these steps, but sometimes they have additional steps here. So let's look through this. So following the instructions, create a class called movie player that has a play method which sets the first movie from the list which sets the first movie from the list of movies that's currently playing. It should also have a firmware version attribute and an update firmware class method. So yeah, this is what I was realizing we didn't have. Update firmware class method that updates to the firmware version. So when they say class method, okay, so I didn't actually include this in my other video, but it is included in the textbook. I mean, it's something good to know, but it's not super important, but it is something good to know. So if you want to create a class method, you always do the @ symbol, and then you just write class method, and then you press enter. So everything below this is part of the class method, quote unquote. So a class method is really just like creating another function. So you would still write it def, and in this case they want us to do something an update firmware class method. So I'm just going to do just that. So update firmware, great. And you know what? Now that I'm realizing it, it was right here, but I just never saw it. They were referring, so they're calling a specific method called update firmware, but I didn't have it. Oh, that makes sense. Okay. So inside of here, what you want to do, it actually takes different parameters than a regular method would. So that's another way you can distinguish a class method from a regular method. So these two are regular methods. This is your special init method that's always included. And if you want to include a class method, of course you would write this line of code on line 15. But inside of here, the first parameter that's passed is actually not self. It's CLS. And what this really means is it says this class method pertains to the movie player class. It just says CLS really just means movie theater or movie player. That's all it means. So that's what that means. And then the next thing you would include is whatever other parameter you might want to include for this specific method. In this case, it looks like it does take a parameter. So the CLS, you don't have to worry about it when you're passing arguments. It's kind of similar to the self, but you just write CLS instead of self for class methods. So this 2.0 isn't being put into the place of CLS, it's being put into the place of something else. So whatever parameter, like, do they specify whatever this name of whatever the name of the parameter I should give it? No, not from what I can see. So I can just do like maybe like new version, because I believe this is supposed to be the new version of the firmware. So this is firmware 1.0, but they want to update its firmware 2.0. So I'll just do new version. Okay, so inside of it, they want us to update the updates version. What do they want us to put inside of it? Let's see. This is what they put. We'll add the update firmware version method, which checks for whether the new version being provided is more recent than the current firmware version before adding. I don't know why they say will add. They should say add, because it confused me, because when they said will add, I thought they already added it for me, but they didn't. You have to add the update firmware class method. They don't even say class method, they just say version method, which is not specific enough. No, so once again, they're trying to trick you by not giving you the full story. It's a class method. The name of this method is update firmware, and then inside of it, it's supposed to check to see if the current firmware version is the most recent firmware version. So I guess right here we're just doing an if statement again. So if, let's do new version, because that's the parameter I passed here, so I could use it inside of my method, is greater than CLS. And this is why we use CLS, because it's referring to the class of movie player. And what is a class attribute that I can use? Firmware version, right? If CLS firmware version, and now I'm going inside of my if statement. So if new version is greater than CLS firmware version, then CLS firmware version equals new version. So basically I'm just saying if the new version is a higher version than 1.0, replace firmware version of 1.0 with whatever the new value is for the new version. So if the new value is 2.0, replace 1.0 with 2.0. And now when I run this code, yeah, it updated player firmware version to 2.0 because, yes, we have three different, so yeah, we have really four methods here. One is a special method, two are just regular methods, one is a specific class method, and this class method is referring to the class of movie player, and it's referencing a class attribute, which a class attribute can be used in any method. That's the point of a class attribute. It's very flexible, it's universal. And really we're just replacing this attribute's value to a new value. So when I am down here for the code that they provided for us, when they're calling the specific method in this class of movie player, using the object of player that we created, that they created up here, they're doing player period update firmware, and they're passing one argument, and that argument is 2.0. So what they do there is they're giving the new version of this right here an actual value. So what this is really saying is, so 2.0 takes the place of new version, and CLS is just, forget about it really, it's just a placeholder. Player is actually taken, well no, movie player is taking the place of CLS. So what this is really doing is it's saying if 1.0 or if 2.0, because new version, is greater than 1.0, change firmware version to 2.0, to the value of 2.0. That's all they're doing. So that's why we got this, and then the current playing is frozen, because frozen is the first element in our list. And yeah, if I go down here, I do my checks, it should give me 3 out of 3. Alright, so how long is this video? It's 42 minutes. Okay. I was hoping this video could be a little bit shorter because the last video was 1:10. I didn't want to overload you guys with 2 one-hour videos, but it is what it is. These labs are a little bit more how to say, involved, I guess, because the topic is so heavy. So let's go to the final lab. I'm going to try to go through this one a little bit quicker, if I can, if they let me. Okay, so they do provide this first piece of code, and then they provide this end piece of code, so we do have to include something right here. So I'm just going to go to steps for completion. So define the equal class. So I'm just going to write equal class very quick. And I already know, just from looking at this, this is my parent class that inherits from the bird class. Okay, so this is my child class. So if you guys want a more in-depth explanation on inheritance and object-oriented programming for Python, watch the other video. This is how you would, I explained in that video, this is how you would write a child class. So now inside of my child class, they want me to override the int initializer method and add a clutch size attribute with a value of 3. So what they really mean is every class in Python has the init method. So this right here, every class will have that piece of code. So I'm just going to do def init. Obviously it begins with self, and then after that I'm going to include wingspan, lifespan, speed, and the reason is because I want my child class to inherit everything that my parent class had, so I do have to include those parameters because the parent class had those parameters, so the child class, if it wants to include all the attributes from the parent class, I also have to include it in the child class, at least as the parameter. Now, down here, you do have to include a special line of code, and it's called the super function. So this is another important piece of code that you have to write so that everything up here, all of these attributes get included here without actually having to rewrite them manually. So to do that, you do super, open parenthesis, close parenthesis, period, and then init. And then here we would do wingspan, lifespan, speed. That's it. Lifespan, yeah, okay. So, okay, sorry, I'm talking to myself. So the last thing they want us to do is they want us to do the clutch size. So they want us, in addition to these existing attributes that were being inherited from the parent class, they want us to add one specific attribute that only belongs to the child class of Eagle. So to do that, it's still within the init method. We just write it after our super function line of code. So here it's just as we would write a typical attribute, self period, clutch size, I believe, clutch size, and it's going to get a value of 3. Great. So that's that. So override the str method and modify it to include mention of clutch size. At the bottom of the script we have initialized. Alright, so this was something that I also didn't include in my other YouTube video, but it is in the book, so if you guys do want at least a explanation of the str, I feel like the book explained it relatively well. Do read that. So I'm just going to write this as, since this is really the last piece of code, I'm just going to go through this really quick. But reference the book if you guys want more in-depth explanation on str. So they want us to override the method and modify it to include dimension of the clutch size. So it's really just another method that you would include inside of your class. This method I'm including inside of the Eagle, which is the child class. It's just gonna change the output of our code so that we're not just getting like random I guess like jumbled output. We're actually going to get the attributes that belong to a certain object of that class. You'll see when we output it. So within it, we do have to, do they tell me? Creating has a clutch size attribute. So they don't really tell me what to write inside of here. They just say that they want it to modify it to include mention of the clutch size. So okay, so my parent class has the str as well. So I'm just thinking how to modify this so that it's only referencing the clutch size. Because it's going to print out all of this. Modify to include mention. So what's actually going to happen is when you introduce a method inside of a child class that has the same name as a method that exists in the parent class, the child class methods will basically take precedence and it will only print out whatever's inside of it. So even though these two methods have the same name, everything in here will not be printed out. But if we do include the super function as we did right here, it will include everything inside of here. So that's what I was thinking. I was thinking maybe let's do that. But if I'm gonna do that, let's write this, because it needs to not only print out this, but it needs to print out the it needs to print out a line of code that mentions the clutch size. So the way you can do this is you can do it a couple different ways. I think the cleanest way of doing it would be to create a new variable, and let's call this variable, I'm just going to call it n. I can't think of anything else. And n is actually going to take that super function, so super period. And instead of doing int, I want it to include this method. So I'm going to do str. And I'm not going to pass any arguments because if self is the only thing inside of here, I don't have to pass any arguments. So basically, I just equated all of this into n, and you'll see why I did that, into the variable of n. So now I'm going to do n equals, so originally the value of n was all of this, but now I'm going to change it to something else. So I'm going to use the f again, and then I'm going to include the value of n here. So n equals all of this, because n has the value of all of this. And then after it, I'm going to say it also, because I believe that's what, they don't, okay, right here. I was going to say they don't give me something to write. It also has a clutch size up to, and then this 3 here is clearly a variable that's taken in that has a value, but we don't know what the value is. So that's why I included f, not only so I can add n here, because f is used whenever you want to write a print statement, but also include variables inside of that print statement without having to like manually write it in a more complicated way. It simplifies the process. So you can include multiple variables in here, not just one. So I'm going to include another variable, and this variable is going to be clutch size. So self period clutch size, and then I'll do period. I'm going to end my print statement as is, and then the last thing I want this to do is I want it to return n. So now I go to Python, and return n is really just saving all of this, all of this like nonsense that I just did of like taking the print statement from the parent class and placing it into n, and then placing that first part right here, and then adding to it with a new print statement at the very end of it, and then adding a variable to the end of that, which is clutch size, which is 3 right here. So I'm really just telling Python point here, then add this, then point there, and then save all of that. That's what return is really doing. It's like save all of that inside of this method. So when I call this method, then give me all that nonsense that I just wrote. Let's go back to running this code, Python 3. So the Eagle has a wingspan of 7.5 feet, has a lifespan of 20 years, and can fly at a maximum speed of 99 miles per hour. It also has a clutch size of up to 3. So is that what they wanted? Please let that be what they wanted. Yes. Okay. So this one was... It's funny because the topic itself is very simple. I think that where you might trip up on is this F. But it is included in the textbook, so that's why I say read the textbook. They do give like a 2-sentence explanation on what F does. You just preface a string with F, and at that point, once you do that, you're allowed to include variables inside of your string. But the variable must be enclosed in curly brackets. That's all it does. It just simplifies creating strings. And then obviously they use the super, and then they do use the str method, which is okay. I mean, in this case, I feel like it has more use than it would typically have, but I wouldn't worry too much about the str method. It is in your book. That's the only place you're going to find it. I didn't explain it in the YouTube video. because I didn't feel it was important enough to explain. But clearly they want you to at least be familiar with it, so that's why they have this lab activity. So yeah, that's it. That was the final lab activity. And that's it for week 12. So yeah, there's two videos for week 12. There's the topic overview, which is really the week 11 and week 12 topic overview all in one. And then there's this video, which is the lab walkthrough. And um, yeah, that's really it. So that's object-oriented programming at its most, um, not just basic. I feel like this was a basic slash intermediate introduction. Obviously, it does get a little bit more advanced with multi-inheritance and all that stuff, but that stuff is not being covered in this course. I do want to make you aware that that stuff does exist, so if you guys do continue with Python and a different course, there is things that we can get more in depth in object-oriented programming, but in this course it just goes up to this. We're just covering up to this basically. Um, so yeah, I hope this was helpful. I apologize for two one-hour videos this week, but it couldn't be helped. I felt like this was information that I needed to verbally tell you guys, because it's one thing to read a book, it's another thing when someone says it to you. It just hits your ear a little bit different, um, and at least says it to you in a way that they understand, because this is the way I understand it. Um, but obviously the book explains it in a slightly different way, and then yeah, everyone interprets and understands things different ways, but if I can introduce different approaches to the topic, maybe it'll help you guys better understand it. At least that's my hope. So that's it. Yeah, that's it for week 12. I will see you guys in week 13. As always, if you have any questions about the topic from week 11 or 12, feel free to email me. I'm always open to responding. I usually respond relatively quick too. And it's important to understand this topic because it will appear in test 3. Not all aspects of object-oriented programming, but some aspects, at least in the multiple choice or even in the programming question. Test 3 hasn't been created, so I'm not going to say certain parts will be included in test 3. I'm just saying, be familiar with with this topic. If you don't understand, reach out. But yeah, that's it for this video. I'll see you guys in week 13.